Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. I still remember the way the morning light came through the half-closed blinds, slicing across the carpet like thin golden blades. It was one of those days that felt ordinary until it wasn't, the kind that starts quietly and ends up changing you in a way you can't undo. I was standing in my mother's room, heart pounding against my ribs, staring at the open drawer where her old lingerie lay folded in neat rows. I didn't plan for any of this. I didn't even know what I was looking for. Maybe it was just curiosity. Maybe something deeper I didn't have the courage to name yet. Mom had gone out early for work, leaving her perfume hanging in the air, that faint floral scent that always made the room feel too alive, too aware. I had been searching for an iron. That's what I told myself anyway, but the moment my eyes caught the soft fabric of the garter belt, pale ivory lace with a hint of faded pink, everything else stopped mattering. My hands were trembling when I reached for it. It was so delicate, it almost didn't feel real. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips as I lifted it, wondering how something so light could carry so much power. It wasn't about wanting to wear it, not at first. It was about what it represented. Confidence, grace, the kind of quiet beauty I never saw in myself. I had always been awkward, fumbling with clothes, hiding behind baggy sweaters and long pants, terrified of being seen for who I was or might become. But holding that garter belt made me feel like I was touching a piece of a secret world, one that wasn't meant for me, but somehow called to me anyway. I don't know what made me do it, but I slipped it around my waist. It didn't fit perfectly, of course, it was too loose, but the feeling that washed over me was impossible to describe. It was equal parts fear and something dangerously close to belonging. I looked in the mirror and felt a sudden, aching contrast. The reflection staring back wasn't just me. It was someone softer, someone braver, someone who didn't flinch at her own reflection. Then I heard the sound, the creak of the front door opening. My breath froze. Mom wasn't supposed to be home for hours. Panic shot through me like an electric current. I tried to unclip it, fumbling with the straps, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But before I could get it off, I heard her voice calling from downstairs. My throat went dry. For a moment, all I could do was stare at myself in the mirror, the half-dressed version of a secret I'd never meant to reveal. I tossed on my jeans and hoodie, the fabric scratching against the lace underneath, the garter belt hidden but pressing against my skin like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. When she came upstairs, I pretended to be looking for something else entirely, an old photo album maybe. She didn't notice anything strange, or if she did, she didn't say. But even after she left again, I couldn't bring myself to take it off. It felt like once I'd put it on, something inside me had shifted, something I couldn't reverse. That should have been the end of it, a small, private moment of foolish curiosity. But it wasn't. That day was only the beginning of a series of events that would spiral further than I could have imagined. Because that evening, I made a mistake that would force me to face everything I'd been hiding. It started with one careless choice, and ended with me standing in public, wearing the very thing I'd sworn to keep secret. The evening started quietly enough, though my mind wouldn't stop replaying what had happened that morning. Every few minutes I'd tug at my hoodie or adjust how I sat, hyper-aware of the hidden band of lace around my waist. It was supposed to be temporary. I'd meant to take it off long before Mom came home again, but I couldn't. It wasn't that I wanted to feel rebellious. It was that somehow I felt more like myself than I ever had before, and the thought of giving that up scared me. I kept in my room most of the day, pretending to do homework but really just sitting there, touching the hem of the garter belt through my clothes, feeling its texture, and wondering what it meant that I couldn't let it go. There was something quietly magnetic about it. It didn't make sense, and yet it made perfect sense. Then late in the afternoon, Mom called from downstairs. "Hey, I need you to run to the store for me. We're out of milk." Her voice was casual, distracted. I hesitated, my mind racing for an excuse, but none came fast enough. "Okay," I answered automatically. It wasn't until I was halfway out the door that I realized I was still wearing it underneath my jeans. I could have turned back. I could have gone upstairs, slipped it off, and no one would ever know. But some strange, reckless part of me whispered that it didn't matter. No one would see it anyway. What harm could there be? The autumn air was cool as I walked down the street, my jacket zipped up to my chin. Every step made me more conscious of the garter belt pressing lightly against my hips. It wasn't visible, but I felt like it was glowing beneath my clothes, broadcasting my secret to the world. I kept my hands buried in my pockets, head down, trying to look normal. The corner store was only a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, and the fluorescent lights were too bright, too revealing. I picked up the milk as quickly as I could and went straight to the checkout, praying the cashier wouldn't say anything beyond the usual small talk. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Just as I reached the counter, I heard someone call my name. "Hey, is that you?" I turned, and my stomach dropped. It was Tyler, one of my classmates. He was with two of his friends, all of them laughing about something. I forced a smile, trying to act natural.
"Oh, hey."
"Yeah, just grabbing something for my mom." Tyler grinned. "Man, you look tense. Relax, it's just milk." They chuckled, and I managed a weak laugh, but I could feel sweat prickling the back of my neck. I just wanted to pay and get out of there, but one of his friends, a girl I barely knew, noticed something. She squinted at me, tilting her head. "What's that?" she said suddenly. My heart nearly stopped. "What?" She pointed, not directly, but close enough. "Something under your hoodie, near your waist. Is that lace?" For a split second, I didn't breathe. My mind went blank. I glanced down instinctively, and that tiny motion betrayed me. Her eyes widened, and she laughed softly, confused but intrigued. "Whoa, are you wearing, like, girl stuff or something?" Tyler looked between us, his grin fading into uncertainty. I could see the moment stretch out like elastic, everything teetering on the edge of disaster. I wanted to deny it, to say something clever, but no words came. My face burned hot, my throat tight. The silence said everything I couldn't. The cashier cleared his throat, breaking the tension. "You paying or not?" I nodded too quickly, shoved the money onto the counter, grabbed the milk, and rushed outside before anyone else could speak. The cold air hit my face like a slap. My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear myself think. The walk home was a blur. My mind replayed her words again and again. "Is that lace?" Echoing until they didn't sound like words anymore. When I reached the house, I dropped the milk on the counter and ran straight to my room, shutting the door behind me. I tore off the garter belt and stared at it in my hands, breathing hard. For a long time, I thought that would be the end of it. A moment of humiliation that would fade with time. But deep down, I knew something had shifted. I couldn't unfeel what I'd felt, this strange mixture of shame and truth that had come alive inside me. And the next morning, when I went to school, I realized that secrets, once they slip into the open, have a way of finding their own audience. The next morning felt heavier than usual, like the air itself was pressing down on me. I barely slept, my mind replaying every second from the night before. I kept telling myself maybe they'd forget, maybe Tyler and his friends wouldn't think much of it. But deep down, I knew how high school worked. Rumors didn't fade, they spread like wildfire, especially when they were about someone quiet, someone who kept to themselves. Someone like me. I stood in front of my closet, staring at my clothes like they were some kind of puzzle I didn't know how to solve. Every shirt felt wrong. Every pair of jeans felt like a costume. I wanted to disappear. I almost didn't go to school at all, but Mom would have asked questions, and I couldn't handle that either. So I threw on the same hoodie from the day before, pulled the hood low, and walked out the door. The moment I stepped into the school hallway, I could tell. The glances came first, quick, uncertain, almost curious. Then came the half-suppressed laughter, the whispers that weren't really whispers at all. I kept my head down, clutching my backpack like it might shield me. I didn't have to look far to see where it started. Tyler was by the lockers with his friends, and when he saw me, his expression shifted from casual to guilty. He didn't laugh, not like the others. He looked conflicted, maybe even sorry. But that didn't matter. The damage was done. Someone brushed past me, muttering under their breath, "Nice lace, man." Another voice followed, teasing, cruel. "Hey, when's the fashion show?" The laughter that rippled afterward was light but sharp, slicing right through me. I didn't say a word all morning. I kept my eyes on the floor, moving from class to class like a shadow. Teachers talked, classmates whispered, and I just existed in the space between, trying to hold myself together. But with each passing hour, something inside me started to twist, not just from embarrassment, but from something stranger. Something like defiance. By lunch, I'd stop hiding in the library. I sat at the edge of the cafeteria, pretending to eat while staring out the window. It was there that Tyler finally approached me. "Hey," he said, awkwardly standing across the table. His tone wasn't mocking. "Look, about yesterday." I didn't let him finish. "Forget it," I muttered, not looking up. He shifted uncomfortably. "They just said stuff, you know how people are." I didn't. "It's fine," I interrupted again, my voice flat. But it wasn't fine, and he knew it. He hesitated for a moment, then said quietly, "You don't have to let them mess with you. It's not a big deal." I finally looked up, and there was something in his eyes, not pity, but curiosity. Maybe even understanding. But that was too much for me to process. I just nodded, hoping he'd go away. And eventually he did. When I got home that afternoon, the house was empty. The quiet felt different now. Not peaceful, but thick with everything I hadn't said. I went back to my mom's room, almost without thinking. The drawer was still open from yesterday, the faint smell of her perfume still hanging in the air. I stared at the garter belt lying there, folded neatly again, like nothing had happened. My reflection in the mirror looked exhausted, small, and unsure. And yet, when I reached out and touched it, that same spark of recognition flickered again. It wasn't about pretending anymore. It wasn't about hiding. It was about trying to understand why this small piece of lace had the power to make me feel something real when the rest of my life felt like an act. I put it on again, slowly this time, carefully adjusting it so it fit right. I didn't bother covering it up. I just stood there, looking at myself, not as a joke, not as a secret, but as a question I was finally brave enough to ask. That's when I heard the front door open. Mom's voice called out, "I'm home early." My stomach dropped. I froze, eyes locked on the mirror, heart hammering. There was no time to hide, no time to change, no time to do anything but face what was coming. My body went rigid the moment I heard her footsteps in the hallway. It was as though every second stretched into minutes. I could hear her putting down her bag, humming faintly, the same way she always did when she was in a good mood. That somehow made it worse. I didn't want to ruin that sound, that little piece of normal, but the mirror in front of me showed the truth. I was standing there in her garter belt, half-dressed, vulnerable, and shaking. I scrambled for an excuse, a plan, anything, but my mind was blank. My hands trembled as I reached for the nearest blanket to throw around myself, but before I could cover up, her voice came from the doorway. "Sweetheart? What are you?" She stopped. The silence that followed was louder than anything I'd ever heard. I didn't turn around right away. I couldn't. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I finally forced myself to meet her eyes in the reflection. She wasn't angry, not yet. Just confused, frozen in that strange space between recognition and disbelief. "Mom," I started, but the word came out too thin, too shaky. She blinked, her mouth opening slightly as if to say something, then closing again. For a long moment she didn't move. Then she stepped inside slowly, her voice quiet. "What are you doing?" There was no good answer. Every version of the truth sounded impossible to explain. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. I don't know. Is that mine?" she asked softly, her eyes moving to the garter belt. I nodded, ashamed. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look angry. She just looked hurt, confused, like she was trying to understand something she never expected to see. "Why?" she asked finally. Not accusing, not mocking, just a quiet, honest question. I stared at the floor, gripping the edge of the blanket. "I don't know," I whispered. "It just made me feel like me. I don't know how else to say it." The words came out before I could stop them. raw and trembling. For a moment, she didn't respond. I could feel the weight of her trying to process what I'd just said. When she finally spoke, her tone had softened. Like you. I nodded, barely able to meet her eyes. I didn't mean to take it. I wasn't trying to be weird. When I wear it, it's like I can breathe, like I don't have to pretend for a little while. Her expression flickered, surprise, then worry, then something else. Compassion, maybe. She walked over slowly, and I braced myself for a lecture, for disappointment. But instead, she reached out and gently touched my shoulder. Hey, she said quietly, you don't have to be afraid of me. That almost broke me. My eyes stung, and for the first time, I let out the breath I'd been holding. I just don't understand, she continued carefully. But maybe that's not something I need to fix. Maybe I just need to listen. Her voice was soft, but I could tell she meant it. Still, the weight of humiliation hung in the air. I wanted to believe her, to trust that it was really that simple, but the memory of what happened at school, the whispers, the laughter, all of it came crashing back. She must have seen it in my face because she asked, "Did something happen?" That question cracked me open. I told her everything, the store, the girl who'd seen the lace, the way everyone had been whispering since. She listened without interrupting, her face pale but calm. When I finished, the silence between us felt both fragile and full of understanding. Finally, she said, "You can't hide from this forever, sweetheart. People will talk, but they always do. What matters is that you're honest with yourself." Honest. The word felt heavy, almost impossible. I didn't even know who myself really was anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, her words circling in my mind like a quiet storm. Honest with yourself. Maybe that's what scared me most. Not the rumors, not even her reaction, but the possibility that deep down, this wasn't a mistake. It was the beginning of something I'd been afraid to name my entire life. And by the next morning, I knew I couldn't keep pretending nothing had changed. Because it had. Everything had. Morning light crept through my curtains like a slow confession. I lay still, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt different, quieter somehow, but not in a comforting way. It was the quiet that comes after a storm, when you know the world outside has shifted and you can't yet tell what survived. I could still hear Mom's voice from the night before, calm, but filled with something I couldn't quite name. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't taken the garter belt away or called it wrong. But her eyes had carried a mix of worry and care that made me feel both safe and exposed at the same time. I didn't know how to process that. When I finally got out of bed, my reflection in the mirror looked tired, shadows under my eyes, hair a mess, but something about the way I looked felt less like hiding. Maybe because I knew she knew now. The secret wasn't mine alone anymore. There was fear in that, but also a strange kind of relief. Downstairs, she was making coffee, the usual clinking of cups echoing through the kitchen. When I stepped in, she glanced up and smiled softly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Morning," she said, as if nothing unusual had happened. "Morning," I echoed, voice rough from sleep. There was a pause. Then, quietly, she said, "I thought maybe we could talk more after breakfast. If you want to." I nodded, sitting across from her. She slid a mug toward me, and we both sat there for a while, the air thick with words neither of us knew how to start saying. "I did some thinking," she said finally. "When I was your age, I remember wanting things that made no sense to anyone else. I remember being scared of what that meant." She looked down at her coffee, swirling it absent-mindedly. "It doesn't make what you're feeling strange. It just makes you human." The way she said it, so steady, so open, made something inside me loosen. I didn't know what to say, so I just whispered, "Thank you." She reached across the table and gave my hand a gentle squeeze. "Whatever this is for you," she said, "I just want you to be safe. And honest. That's all." The word safe hung in the air. It reminded me of school, of the laughter, the whispers, the sideways glances that made my chest tighten. "They already know," I said quietly. "They'll never let me forget it." She looked at me with that calm, Careful patience only a mother could have. Then you show them it doesn't break you. I wanted to believe her, but I couldn't imagine walking through those halls again, pretending I didn't hear every cruel word. Still, something in her tone made me feel that maybe I could at least try. When I went back to my room, I sat at the edge of the bed and looked at the garter belt lying neatly folded on the dresser.
I didn't touch it this time.
I just stared at it, thinking about how something so small could start a chain of events that forced me to see myself more clearly than ever before. And that's when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Tyler. "Hey, can we talk?" For a moment, I didn't move. My pulse quickened, the screen glowing in my hand. I almost ignored it. But something about the simplicity of the message, the way he didn't make a joke, didn't pretend, made me type back before I could second-guess myself.
Yeah.
"Where?" A minute later, his reply came. "Behind the bleachers after school. I just want to talk. Promise." The rest of the day passed in slow motion. Every class felt longer, every stare heavier. But underneath all the anxiety was a spark of something else. Curiosity, maybe even hope. When the final bell rang, I walked out to the field, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might echo in the air. Tyler was already there, hands shoved into his pockets, shifting awkwardly. He looked nervous, and not in the way people do when they're planning to mock someone. "Hey," he said when he saw me, voice low. "Thanks for coming." I stood a few feet away, crossing my arms. "You said you wanted to talk." He nodded, taking a breath.
Yeah.
"Look, I didn't tell anyone about the thing at the store. I swear I didn't. But somehow people found out and I should have said something. I should have stopped them." I searched his face for any sign of insincerity, but there wasn't any. He looked genuinely regretful. "It doesn't matter," I said. "They'll think what they want." He hesitated. I don't think it's as bad as you think. People talk, sure, but they get bored. You just have to keep showing up. Eventually, they'll move on." It wasn't much comfort, but there was honesty in his voice. And maybe, for the first time in days, I didn't feel completely alone. Then he said something I didn't expect. "I think it's cool, actually, that you don't hide who you are." The words hung there, fragile but real. I didn't know what to do with them. For the first time, I smiled, a small, uncertain thing. "Thanks," I murmured. As we walked back toward the school building, I realized that maybe this wasn't the end of my story. Maybe it was just the awkward, uncertain beginning of something that would take time to understand. But I wasn't running anymore. That night, after meeting Tyler, I couldn't stop replaying our conversation. His words, quiet, awkward, yet somehow sincere, kept circling in my mind. "I think it's cool that you don't hide who you are." No one had ever said something like that to me before. Not as a joke, not as a whisper behind my back, but as if it were simply true. When I got home, Mom was on the couch reading. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes soft, cautious. "How was your day?" she asked, in that careful tone she used when she wasn't sure if it was safe to ask more. I hesitated for a moment, then said, "Better." Her shoulders eased a little, and she smiled. "Good." She didn't press for details, but I could see she wanted to. Instead, she just said, "I made dinner. It's on the stove." We didn't talk much that evening, but there was a quiet sense of understanding between us, like we were both learning how to move through this new version of our lives without tripping over the words we hadn't yet learned how to say. Later, lying in bed, I thought about everything that had happened since the first time I touched that garter belt. It felt like years had passed in just a few days. The humiliation, the fear, the honesty, it all blurred together into something I couldn't quite name. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was movement. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself properly, not just checking for flaws or trying to hide. I studied the person staring back at me. The face was familiar, but the way I was seeing it wasn't. My hair was a little longer than before, just brushing the tops of my ears. My skin looked pale, but my eyes, tired as they were, had something new in them. A small spark of recognition, maybe even acceptance. I reached for my clothes and hesitated when I saw the garter belt folded neatly in the drawer. For a long time, I just stared at it. The first time I wore it, it felt like a secret. The second time, it felt like shame. But now it felt like something else. Not a disguise, not rebellion, just a quiet truth I didn't have to fear. I didn't wear it that day, but I didn't hide it away either. I left it there, visible, a reminder that it didn't have to mean embarrassment. It could simply be part of who I was. At school, the whispering had dulled. People still glanced at me, a few still smirked or murmured things under their breath, but most had moved on to new gossip. That's how it always went. Attention burned bright and quick before flickering out. But the difference was me. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I wasn't apologizing with my posture or avoiding eye contact. I just existed, quietly, steadily, and that seemed to confuse them more than anything else. Tyler waved at me between classes. It wasn't a big gesture, but it felt like one. A simple acknowledgement that I wasn't invisible. Later that week, something unexpected happened. After class, the same girl who'd pointed out the lace in the store, the one who'd laughed, came up to me by the lockers. My stomach tightened as she approached, but her expression wasn't mocking this time.
"Hey," she said.
"Can I say something?" I nodded, wary. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, "for what I said at the store. I didn't mean to embarrass you. I just didn't get it, and I shouldn't have made fun." I blinked, unsure how to respond. Her words were genuine, her tone sincere. "It's okay," I said after a moment. "I didn't really get it either." She smiled a little at that, almost relieved. "Well, if it helps, you handled it better than most people would have." That took guts. I wasn't sure it had been bravery so much as necessity, but her kindness landed somewhere deep. For the first time since that awful day, I didn't feel like a punchline. When I got home that afternoon, Mom was at the kitchen table with her laptop, typing something. She looked up when I came in, smiling softly. "You seem lighter," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "It was a better day." She closed her laptop and studied me for a moment, then said, "You know, when I was your age, I used to wear things your grandmother didn't understand either." It took her a while to accept it, but she did. Her words lingered in the air. "So, you're okay with this?" I asked quietly. She nodded slowly. "I don't fully understand it yet, but I'm okay with you figuring out who you are." The relief that washed over me was quiet but deep, like a soft tide pulling me toward something steadier. That night, I went back to my room and stood in front of the mirror again. For the first time, I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I just looked, and for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was starting to see the real me looking back. Days began to pass in a rhythm that almost felt normal again. I would wake up, go to school, see familiar faces, and slowly start to breathe a little easier. The sharp edges of humiliation dulled into memory. The whispers faded into background noise, and life, in its quiet way, moved forward. But something within me refused to go back to how it was before. Once you start seeing yourself differently, you can't unsee it. One afternoon, while cleaning my room, I found an old photo album tucked behind a stack of books. Inside were pictures from when I was little, birthday parties, vacations, messy hair, and wide smiles. I studied one of the photos for a long time. Me, maybe 7 years old, wearing a bright red towel like a cape, spinning around the living room. My mom was laughing in the background. There was something unfiltered in that image, something free. And I realized I'd been chasing that same feeling all along, the freedom to exist without apology. At school, the conversations began to shift. People who once avoided me now acted like nothing had ever happened. Some still gave me odd looks, but they weren't cruel anymore, just curious. Tyler and I started sitting together at lunch, not every day, but enough that it became a quiet routine. We didn't talk much about what had happened. Instead, we talked about music, movies, random things. It was easy, unforced. One day, during lunch, he looked at me thoughtfully and said, "You seem happier lately." I smiled a little. "Maybe I am." He nodded, then added, "It suits you." I didn't know how to respond, so I just looked away, my heart strangely warm. It wasn't about him, exactly. It was about being seen, not as a mistake, not as a joke, but as a person still figuring things out. A few days later, Mom asked if I wanted to go shopping with her. The idea made my stomach twist with both excitement and fear. "I thought you hated shopping," I said cautiously. She smiled. "I do. But I think it might be nice to pick something that feels like you." The drive to the mall felt long, every mile filled with nervous anticipation. When we walked through the doors, my hands were clammy, my pulse quick. I half expected people to stare, though I knew logically they wouldn't care. But Mom kept her tone casual, guiding me gently toward a section I'd never dared to explore before, the women's accessories. I lingered near a rack of scarves, fingers brushing over the soft fabrics, each one a small symbol of something new. Mom didn't push. She just stood nearby, letting me look. I could tell she was watching, not out of judgment but out of quiet support. After a while, she picked up a simple black scarf with subtle lace trim. "This one's nice," she said, holding it out. "It's subtle, but it's got personality." I hesitated, then took it. The fabric was soft, light, almost weightless. "Yeah," I said quietly. "It's nice." We bought it without much fanfare, but when we got home and I draped it around my neck, something inside me shifted again. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't about the scarf itself. It was about permission, the silent understanding that I didn't have to hide who I was anymore. Later that evening, while helping her fold laundry, Mom spoke softly. "You know, I used to think I had everything figured out when I was your age. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of things. So, if you're still figuring yourself out, that's okay. Life gives us time for that." I didn't answer right away. My throat was tight with gratitude I didn't know how to put into words. Finally, I said, "Thanks for not freaking out." She laughed softly. "I've learned that life's too short to freak out about things that come from the heart." That night, I placed the garter belt carefully in a small box on my dresser. Not to hide it, but to honor it. It had been the beginning of everything, the mistake that wasn't really a mistake at all. It had shown me something about myself I might never have found otherwise. As I turned off the light and lay down, I realized that humiliation had somehow transformed into clarity. The same thing that once filled me with fear had become the quiet center of who I was learning to be. And though I didn't have all the answers yet, I finally felt ready to keep asking the questions. Autumn deepened. The trees outside the school turned shades of amber and red, their leaves scattering across the courtyard like forgotten confessions. The air grew crisp, and every breath felt cleaner, sharper, alive with a quiet kind of renewal.
Something in me mirrored that change.
I wasn't the same person who'd panicked in front of a mirror a few weeks earlier. I was still uncertain, yes, but the fear wasn't in control anymore. Classes went by, grades piled up, and life moved in its slow rhythm. The whispers that had once haunted every hallway faded into memory, replaced by new rumors about other people. But sometimes, when I caught a reflection of myself in a window, I saw a version of me that felt a little closer to the truth. One afternoon, as I was leaving school, Tyler caught up to me. "Hey," he said, breath visible in the cold air. "You walking home?" "Yeah," I said. "Mind if I join?" We walked in silence for a while, leaves crunching under our shoes. He kicked at a pebble, glancing at me sideways. "So, are you okay now? With everything?" It was a fair question, but a hard one. I thought about it before answering. "I think so. Or I'm getting there." He nodded. "You know, people stopped talking. I think they got bored of it." "I noticed," I said quietly. Then he smiled a little sheepishly. "That means you win, you know." I laughed under my breath. "I don't think it was a competition." "Still," he said, shrugging. "You handled it better than anyone else could have. You didn't let them see you break." His words stayed with me long after we parted ways. I hadn't felt brave when it happened. I'd felt terrified. But maybe bravery wasn't about feeling fearless. It was about showing up even when everything inside you wanted to run. That weekend, Mom surprised me again. She handed me a small shopping bag as I came into the kitchen. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," she said with a half smile. Inside was a sewing kit and a few yards of soft satin ribbon. "I thought maybe you could make something," she said. "Something that's yours this time." I looked up startled. "You mean?" She nodded. You don't have to borrow anymore. The gesture hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the garter belt or the ribbon or the clothes. It was about her saying, I see you. About her trusting me enough to make my own choices. That night, I spread the materials out on my desk. I wasn't very good at sewing, but I wanted to try. The satin caught the light, shimmering softly as I worked. It was clumsy, uneven, full of mistakes, but when I finished, it was mine. Not stolen, not borrowed, created. When I showed it to Mom, she smiled, running her hand over the stitches. It's beautiful, she said. Imperfect, but beautiful. I laughed. Kind of like me. Exactly like you, she said, her voice warm. The weeks that followed felt lighter. My world was still small, but it didn't feel like a cage anymore. Sometimes I'd wear what I made under my clothes, not because I had to hide it, but because it made me feel grounded, connected to that quiet part of myself I was still learning to understand. Every so often, I'd think back to that day in the store, the fear, the shame, the way my reflection had felt like a stranger. Now, it was different. I didn't hate that version of me anymore. I felt sorry for them, maybe even proud of how far they'd come. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror again, holding the scarf Mom had bought me and the ribbon I'd sewn. The reflection looking back was still uncertain, still figuring things out, but no longer afraid to try. The girl in the mirror wasn't just a secret anymore. She was becoming real. Winter came slowly, creeping through the cracks in the windows and frosting the mornings in pale light. The days grew shorter, the air colder, and everything around me seemed to quiet down. School felt calmer now. The chaos that had once defined my world had softened into something almost peaceful. And through it all, I kept learning who I was one day at a time. Sometimes I'd catch myself smiling for no reason in the mirror, brushing my hair in the morning, wrapping that black scarf around my neck before heading out. It wasn't about pretending to be anyone else anymore. It was about allowing myself to be. Tyler and I had fallen into an easy friendship. He didn't treat me differently, which was exactly what I needed. He still joked around, still teased me about my terrible handwriting or how I always forgot my locker combination. But there was a quiet respect in the way he spoke to me now. He never brought up what had happened again, but sometimes his glances said he remembered. Not with judgment, but with understanding. One particularly cold afternoon, he handed me a small, crumpled paper bag as we left school. Here, he said, awkwardly shoving it toward me. What's this? He shrugged. Just open it when you get home. I raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. When I got home and opened it, I found a simple hair clip, silver, with a small blue gem in the middle. The kind of thing that could go unnoticed if you wanted, or sparkle if the light hit it just right. There was a small note inside. You don't have to hide to be seen. The words made my throat tighten. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It wasn't about that. It was a moment of human kindness, one that acknowledged something deep without needing to explain it. I set the clip on my dresser beside the ribbon and the scarf, a small collection of the pieces that had brought me here. That evening, Mom found me looking at them. She smiled softly and sat beside me on the bed. You're collecting reminders, she said. I guess I am, I replied. Of what? She asked gently. I thought for a moment that I'm allowed to exist as I am. Her smile deepened, her eyes glistening just a little. You always were, she whispered. You just needed to believe it. For a while, we just sat there, quiet, the hum of the house wrapping around us like a blanket. It struck me how different this silence felt compared to the one that had filled her room that first day. That silence had been fear. This one was peace. As the days passed, I began helping her more around the house. Small things like folding laundry, tidying up, running errands. Once, when I was folding clothes, I came across that drawer again. The one where it had all started. The garter belt was still there, tucked neatly away. I hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. I didn't need to wear it anymore to understand what it had shown me. But I also didn't regret the day I did. When Mom came in and saw me standing there, she didn't say anything. She just met my eyes, gave a little nod, and kept walking. That tiny gesture, so simple, So natural, felt like the final step in something long and difficult finally coming full circle. One night, I sat by the window watching the snow fall in the streetlight. Each flake landed softly, vanishing the moment it touched the ground. I thought about all the versions of myself I'd shed, each one scared, uncertain, trying too hard to fit into a shape that never felt right. And I thought about the version that remained, the one learning to breathe, to speak, to take up space without apology. The world outside was quiet, blanketed in white. And for the first time in a long time, the quiet inside me matched it. Spring returned quietly, almost shyly. The air softened, carrying the smell of new grass and rain. Trees began to bloom again, and the world slowly pulled itself out of the long hush of winter. For the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't dread the change of seasons. I felt ready for it, ready for something new. It had been months since the day everything changed, yet sometimes it still felt close, like a story I could reach out and touch. The memory of that first morning, standing in front of the mirror, trembling, wrapped in my mother's garter belt, no longer burned with shame. It didn't hurt anymore. It had become something else, a beginning, a strange and clumsy start to understanding who I really was. I didn't have all the answers yet. Some days I still felt unsure, caught between labels that didn't quite fit and expectations I couldn't fully meet. But there was no rush anymore. I had stopped trying to define everything at once. Maybe it wasn't about a single moment of realization, but a slow unfolding, a becoming. Mom noticed the change, too. She didn't ask questions she knew I couldn't answer yet. Instead, she just gave me space to grow, gently, patiently. Sometimes, she'd leave small gestures, a new hair tie on my desk, a gentle reminder scribbled on a note. Be kind to yourself. Those little things meant more than she knew. One Saturday morning, as I was helping her hang clean laundry to dry, she glanced at me and said, "You've changed a lot these past few months." I smiled faintly.
Yeah.
I think I finally stopped trying to be who I thought everyone wanted. She nodded. That's the hardest part. But once you do, everything else gets easier. We finished hanging the clothes in comfortable silence, the sunlight catching on the edges of fabric. For the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in my own life. I belonged here in this moment, exactly as I was. A few days later, during art class at school, we were asked to draw something that represented transformation. I stared at the blank page for a long time before sketching a ribbon twisting into the shape of a bird, its wings spreading out of the page. When the teacher stopped by my desk and asked what it meant, I said simply, "Becoming yourself." She smiled, thoughtful. That's a beautiful answer. I glanced at my drawing again, realizing that was the truth. Becoming myself wasn't about perfection. It was about movement, about the quiet decision to stop running from who I was. That afternoon, as I walked home under a sky streaked with soft pink clouds, I reached into my pocket and felt the silver hair clip Tyler had given me months before. I smiled, fastening it gently into my hair. The gem caught the fading light, a quiet reflection of everything I had survived. When I got home, Mom was sitting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. She looked up, smiling as I sat beside her. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I replied, and I meant it. We sat there together, watching the world shift colors as the sun dipped lower. The air was filled with the soft sounds of spring, birds calling, leaves rustling, the faint hum of distant laughter. Everything felt new, but not in a way that erased what came before. The past was still there, part of me, shaping me. But it didn't define me anymore. I thought back to the person I had been, the one who stood frozen in fear, thinking that wearing something delicate had been a mistake. That person had believed that shame and discovery were the same thing. But now I understood they weren't. One had broken me open, the other had helped me grow. I looked at Mom and whispered, almost to myself, "I'm glad you came home early that day." She turned to me, curious. "Why's that?" "Because if you hadn't, I think I'd still be hiding." Her expression softened, and she reached over, brushing a stray hair from my face. "You were never meant to hide," she said. You were meant to bloom. The words settled deep, quiet and true. I looked out at the trees swaying in the soft evening breeze, the last light of day spilling through their leaves, and I realized she was right. The humiliation, the whispers, the fear, they had all been part of the same strange journey. They hadn't destroyed me. They had revealed me. And as the sky turned gold and then blue, I sat there with her, my reflection faintly visible in the window beside us. Not the reflection of someone pretending anymore, but of someone finally learning to live as herself. Someone who had stopped being afraid to be seen. Someone who, against all odds, had found peace in her own reflection.